I had carried a secret for 10 years. Every morning, every conversation, every quiet moment alone, I carried it like a weight pressing down on my chest. For a decade, I kept this truth buried inside me, hoping it would never come to light. I thought I was protecting my marriage, protecting my family, and protecting myself. But one evening, I made the decision to speak. I told my husband the secret I had guarded for 10 years. I thought finally sharing it would bring relief, maybe even a deeper connection, because I believed honesty could heal. Instead, it brought violence. The moment the words left my lips, everything changed. In a blink, the life I had carefully constructed shattered. My husband's response was immediate, cold, and terrifying. He reached for me, his hands around my throat, choking me as if the truth itself was a crime. We lived in New York, in a modest suburban neighborhood where everything looked calm and ordinary from the outside. To anyone passing by, our marriage appeared stable, loving, and normal. We had children, a home, routines, and social networks that trusted us as a couple. No one would have guessed that underneath the surface I carried a secret so heavy it could topple the life we had built. I kept it for 10 years, not out of deceit, but out of fear of shattering everything I loved. I wanted to shield my family, believing that some truths could wait. I was wrong. The secret itself was devastating. It was not something minor, not a fleeting mistake, but a truth that could completely alter how my husband saw me, how he saw our life together, and how our children understood their family. It was the kind of secret that could change relationships, finances, and trust forever. Carrying it for a decade meant carefully managing every interaction, every question, every glance, to make sure nothing accidentally revealed the truth. I became an expert at silence and avoidance, a master of careful phrasing, and yet the secret was always with me, shadowing every happy moment, every mundane day, a quiet but constant threat. There were nights when I lay awake, feeling the weight of 10 years pressing down, wondering if the truth would ever be safe to tell. I imagined the relief I might feel if I could finally speak, but I also imagined the danger. I worried about how my husband would react, whether he would understand, whether he would forgive, or whether the life I had painstakingly built would unravel completely. I weighed the fear of exposure against the burden of silence for years, and I kept choosing silence, thinking it was the safer path. But over time, the cost of secrecy became unbearable. The secret was no longer just mine. It was a presence in every conversation, every decision, and every interaction with my husband and children. My heart ached under the weight of the truth, and I realized that carrying it silently was hurting me more than it was protecting anyone else. One evening, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, I decided I could no longer bear it. I had to tell him. The moment I began to speak, the house felt different, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I chose my words carefully, my voice trembling but clear. The truth poured out of me, decade-old fears spilling into the room. I expected shock, maybe tears, perhaps even anger, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. The words had barely left my lips when my husband's eyes darkened. The calm I had assumed would follow revelation did not come. Instead, I felt his hands on my throat, his grip tight, unrelenting. My world narrowed to the sensation of pressure, panic, and disbelief. He was choking me, and in that instant, the safety of my home and the marriage I had trusted vanished. In those terrifying seconds, a flood of realization hit me. This was the moment I had feared for 10 years, and it was worse than anything I had imagined. The secret I had carried to protect our family had triggered an act of violence that changed everything. My life, my children, and my future were suddenly at risk. Survival became the only thought that mattered. My heart raced. My mind screamed for a solution, and instinct took over. I had to escape, to breathe, to think, to survive. Once I was able to pull away, my body shaking and sore, I knew the next steps would determine the rest of my life. I needed medical attention to document the assault. I needed to ensure my safety, and I needed to consider legal measures. The choking was not just a moment of rage, it was proof of danger and control, evidence that could not be ignored. I realized that keeping the secret had protected no one. It had only allowed the threat to grow beneath the surface, hidden and unchallenged. For 10 years, our marriage had seemed normal, even ideal to outsiders. Friends and neighbors saw a family that laughed together, shared meals, celebrated birthdays, and attended school events. We presented a united front, a perfect image of stability. But beneath the surface, every smile I gave carried the weight of a secret I dared not share. My husband was a loving father on the surface, kind in public, yet beneath that exterior, I always felt the tension of a potential storm. It was this tension that had made carrying my secret both necessary and unbearable. The secret itself had grown in weight over the years. I had kept it not out of malice, but out of love, fear, and a misguided sense of protection. Revealing it earlier might have caused arguments, suspicion, or even heartbreak. But I thought I could manage it. I convinced myself that silence was safer, that time would dull the impact, that perhaps the truth would never need to surface. I became skilled at compartmentalizing, carefully placing the secret in a mental box and carrying it everywhere, even into the most intimate moments. Every anniversary, every family gathering, every night spent tucking the children into bed, I felt the constant pressure of the lie. It influenced every choice, every word, every action. I avoided certain topics, redirected conversations, and carefully monitored my expressions. Each time my husband praised my honesty or trusted me with small confidences, I felt a pang of guilt and a shiver of fear. How could I maintain this deception without it unraveling? How long before the truth emerged unbidden? The secret had its roots in a time before we had children, a decision I had made when I thought it would protect us all. Over the years, it became a living thing, growing and twisting in my mind, shaping my thoughts and emotions. It dictated how I navigated arguments, how I responded to challenges, and how I built routines to maintain control over what he knew and what he did not. For a decade, it became the invisible thread tying me to both loyalty and fear, a tether I could not cut without consequence. Living with this constant burden took its toll. I experienced anxiety that I tried to hide, sleepless nights filled with scenarios of what might happen if the truth emerged. I often wondered if my husband would understand, or if the revelation would destroy the trust we had built. I feared judgment, rejection, or even rage. And still I hoped that one day I could tell him under the right circumstances in a controlled way that would allow our marriage to endure. The evening I chose to confess was quiet, ordinary in every way, yet it marked the turning point. We were home after dinner, the children asleep upstairs, the house still. I could feel the weight of 10 years pressing down on me more heavily than ever. I realized that the longer I waited, the harder it would become, and the longer the secret remained, the greater the eventual impact on my family. I wanted honesty. I wanted release, and I wanted to finally be free of the suffocating burden. When I finally spoke, the words were deliberate, slow, and careful. I watched my husband's face closely as I revealed the truth, bracing myself for any reaction. I had imagined anger, disbelief, perhaps even tears, but I had not prepared for the instant violent reaction that followed. His hands were on my throat before I could even register the danger. Choking, crushing, cold, and unrelenting. My vision blurred, My body panicked, and the life I thought I had was gone in an instant. The act of violence was both terrifying and illuminating. I understood immediately that our marriage was no longer a partnership built on trust, but a dynamic of control and danger. The secret, which I had carried to protect him, myself, and our family, had triggered a violent response that left me gasping, terrified, and forced to confront the reality of my situation. I realized that the 10 years of silence, the careful management of information, and the hope that honesty could be safely shared had all been a fragile illusion. Once I escaped his grasp, my thoughts shifted quickly to survival and documentation. I needed medical attention to record the injuries, evidence of bruising, and the trauma of being choked. I needed the police involved to ensure my immediate safety and to begin building the legal case that would ultimately protect me. Every action had to be precise, calculated, and deliberate because the stakes were no longer just emotional. They were life-altering and legal. Even though our home looked peaceful, I carried a storm inside me every day. The secret was like a shadow I couldn't shake, following me from room to room, lingering over dinner tables, floating in conversations with the children, and whispering in my mind during quiet moments alone. I had learned to hide it in plain sight, smiling, laughing, nodding, pretending that everything was fine, while inside I was fraying at the edges. The tension of keeping it had seeped into my bones over the years, leaving me exhausted and on edge. My husband, unaware of the burden I carried, acted as if our life was simple, straightforward, and ordinary. He believed in our marriage completely, trusting me with his thoughts, his concerns, and his everyday fears. He never suspected that I had been harboring a truth that could change everything. His trust, the very thing that made me want to protect him, became a source of guilt. I loved him deeply, yet the weight of the secret made me fear that love could be the reason everything would collapse. The secret itself had become an invisible presence in every interaction. I would carefully avoid certain topics, sometimes redirecting conversations that were too close to the truth. I avoided leaving evidence behind, even in mundane things like emails, receipts, or old documents. My memory became a tool, keeping track of what he knew, what he suspected, and what I had to keep hidden. Every question he asked about the past, about family matters, about financial decisions, forced me to balance honesty with omission. I became an expert at saying enough to satisfy without revealing the truth. There were moments when I almost told him before that night. I considered hinting, preparing him gently, or revealing small parts over time. Each time, fear held me back. I worried about his reaction, about the way it could hurt him, about the impact on our children. 10 years of careful calculation had taught me that the safest path was silence, even if it was unbearable. But that silence had also been a prison, isolating me from the intimacy I craved and the honesty I needed. I thought about the future often, imagining scenarios where the secret came out by accident or through someone else. Each possibility terrified me. I realized that delaying the revelation might make the fallout worse. The longer the truth stayed hidden, the more explosive the eventual reaction could be. That realization, combined with exhaustion from carrying the secret, pushed me to make the decision to tell him that night. I wanted to take control of the narrative, to speak from my own voice, to shape the moment of revelation rather than have it happen unexpectedly. The evening I chose to confess felt ordinary, yet it carried the weight of a decade. We were in the living room, the children asleep, the lights low, and the house quiet. I felt my hands tremble slightly as I prepared to speak, my mind rehearsing phrases, my heart pounding in anticipation. The words were heavy, each one chosen carefully, each one a step into unknown territory. I wanted to be honest, clear, and calm, hoping that truth might soften the blow and preserve our marriage. As I spoke, the tension in the room shifted. My husband's face changed subtly at first, then his expression hardened. The calm I expected did not come. I hadn't anticipated the violence that would follow, the choking that made me feel trapped, terrified, and completely helpless in my own home. The act itself was shocking, the suddenness and intensity leaving me gasping and disoriented. In an instant, I understood that this confession, meant to bring honesty and freedom, had instead unleashed a dangerous side of the person I thought I knew. In that moment, survival became my only focus. The secret I had carried for 10 years suddenly seemed small compared to the immediate threat to my life. My body responded instinctively, pulling away, seeking air, seeking safety. The marriage I had worked so hard to protect was no longer a safe space. My heart raced, my mind screamed for clarity, and I realized that the path forward would require careful planning, legal protection, and unwavering determination. Once I escaped his grasp, I immediately considered the practical steps needed to protect myself. Medical documentation was essential, not only to record the injuries, but also to provide evidence of the assault if legal action became necessary. Contacting law enforcement became critical to ensure my immediate safety and to begin the process of securing a protective order. The moment of violence had turned my life upside down, but it also clarified my priorities: survival, safety, and establishing a legal foundation to prevent further harm. Even after the initial shock of his hands on my throat, my mind raced through every possible consequence. I felt the sting of betrayal, not just from the violence, but from the realization that the husband I had trusted for 10 years could respond to truth with aggression. I replayed every memory of our marriage, trying to understand the man I had thought I knew. Was this rage always there, hidden beneath a calm exterior? Had I ignored warning signs, or had my confession truly triggered something uncontrollable in him? The questions circled endlessly, offering no answers, only fear and confusion. The children were upstairs, unaware of the chaos unfolding below. That thought both comforted and terrified me. I wanted to protect them, yet I knew that the violence could escalate if left unchecked. The home, which had always felt like a sanctuary, suddenly seemed dangerous. I realized that 10 years of secrecy had not shielded anyone. It had only delayed the inevitable confrontation. My instinct was to ensure safety immediately for myself and for my family, even if it meant shattering the fragile illusions we had all lived under. I also reflected on the secret itself. The reason I had risked everything by finally speaking. It was not a petty lie or a small mistake. It was a truth that defined a large part of my life and shaped the foundation of my marriage. Keeping it hidden had felt necessary at the time, but the cost had been immense. 10 years of careful navigation, avoidance, and silence had left me constantly anxious, never fully at ease, and always on guard. Even in moments of happiness, the secret lingered, a quiet pressure that never left me. The confession I thought would bring release, perhaps even understanding. I had imagined a long conversation, a moment of shock, and then acceptance. I wanted honesty to strengthen our bond, to lift the burden I had carried for a decade. Instead, it became a turning point of fear and danger. The contrast between my intentions and the reality was stark, leaving me reeling and questioning every decision I had ever made. After the immediate threat subsided and I had pulled away, my thoughts turned to practical matters. The physical evidence of the assault, the redness around my neck, the lingering pain, the physical shock, needed to be documented. I knew that seeking medical attention was the first step in ensuring my own safety and establishing a record of the abuse. The act of leaving the room, getting help, and planning my next steps felt like reclaiming a sliver of control in a situation where control had been violently taken from me. I also began to consider the legal implications. A temporary protective order could provide immediate safety and ensure that my husband could not continue the aggression. Filing a police report would create a formal record, protecting me and potentially the children, and setting the stage for long-term legal action if necessary. These steps were not easy. They meant acknowledging that my marriage was fractured, that trust had been irrevocably broken, and that I needed to take decisive action to survive. At the same time, I grappled with guilt and self-doubt. I had held this secret for 10 years out of love and a misguided sense of protection, believing I was acting in the best interests of everyone involved. Yet now, the very act of revealing it had provoked the violence I had feared. I questioned whether the timing, the manner, or even the decision to speak at all had been a mistake. But deep down, I knew that continuing to hide the truth would only perpetuate the cycle of fear and danger. The choice to speak was mine, and despite the consequences, it had to be made. After the choking ended and I regained control of my breath, the house felt smaller, tighter, and more dangerous than it ever had. Every corner seemed like a threat, every shadow a reminder that the man I had married could become violent at the turn of a single revelation. My first instinct was to make sure I was truly safe in the moment. I moved to a different room, locking the door behind me, my heart racing so fast it felt like it could burst from my chest. The quiet of the house became deafening, punctuated only by my own shallow breaths and the pounding of adrenaline. As fear subsided slightly, reality began to settle over me like a heavy fog. I realized that this was no ordinary argument or fleeting moment of anger. The act of choking proved the depth of his control and rage. I understood that immediate steps were necessary, not only to protect myself, but also to document the assault for any legal action. I could not rely on hope or his promises to change. Survival meant taking control of the situation entirely, methodically, and without hesitation. The first step was medical documentation. I knew that evidence of the assault would be critical if I wanted to protect myself and the children. I made my way to the hospital, the bruising on my neck throbbing as each step reminded me of the danger I had just escaped. The emergency room staff were calm but efficient, taking photographs, noting the physical injuries, and asking careful questions. Every word I spoke, every test administered, became part of the record that would ultimately become crucial in both the protective order and divorce proceedings. Next came contacting law enforcement. I filed a police report as soon as possible, knowing that creating an official record was essential. I described the events in precise detail, including the secret I had revealed and the violent reaction it provoked. I included past examples of controlling or aggressive behavior to establish a pattern, even though it had not previously escalated to physical violence. The detective listened carefully, taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Their attention and validation helped me understand that I was not overreacting and that the law would take the situation seriously. With the police report filed, I moved to secure a temporary protective order. This legal barrier was crucial to ensure immediate safety. I explained the events to the judge, presenting the medical documentation, the police report, and a clear account of the danger I faced. The order was granted swiftly, providing relief in the form of a legal shield. While it did not erase the trauma, it gave me a concrete step forward, a way to reclaim some control over my environment and over my own life. Even as I secured these protective measures, my mind turned to the divorce. The choking incident was not just an isolated act. It was the culmination of a decade-long burden of secrecy, fear, and manipulation. I realized that to truly protect myself, I needed to initiate legal separation and divorce proceedings. This required careful planning, gathering evidence, and preparing for the inevitable attempts by my husband to minimize or deny the violence. I focused on collecting any documentation that proved his controlling nature, financial patterns that could indicate coercion, and any witnesses who could corroborate my account. The secret I had revealed became a critical component of the case. Initially, it had been the trigger for his violence, but reframed through legal counsel, it demonstrated the complexity and pressure I had faced. The disclosure was not reckless. It was the culmination of 10 years of emotional and psychological tension, and his reaction proved the danger inherent in the relationship. This distinction was vital in court to show that my actions were measured and necessary, not provocative or unreasonable. I also engaged with domestic violence advocates to guide me through the process. They helped me understand my rights, offered emotional support, and provided strategies for navigating interactions with my husband while ensuring my safety. Their guidance was invaluable, helping me move through the legal maze with precision, making sure each step I took strengthened my position rather than exposing me to further danger. Now this is where I did secure the final, long-term protective order based on the medical evidence of the choking that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. This decision was not made lightly. It required courage, careful planning, and the ability to separate emotion from strategy. Every step was calculated to protect my life, my children, and my future. Once the protective order was in place, I turned my full attention to the divorce proceedings. The act of choking had shattered the illusion of a normal, loving marriage, but the years of secrecy and emotional tension meant that the divorce would not be straightforward. My husband tried to minimize the incident, portraying it as a misunderstanding or exaggeration. He even attempted to manipulate mutual friends and family, planting seeds of doubt about my reliability, my temperament, and my intentions. I quickly realized that winning in court would require meticulous documentation, witnesses, and irrefutable evidence. I started by compiling a comprehensive timeline of events. Every subtle controlling action, every moment of psychological pressure, every instance where the secret had influenced our interactions was carefully recorded. I included dates, conversations, and behaviors, emphasizing patterns rather than isolated incidents. This was not about revenge. It was about establishing context for the choking. The court needed to see that the violence was part of a larger pattern of control and that my actions were grounded in years of emotional burden. The secret itself, the reason I had finally confessed, became a crucial element in framing the narrative. It explained my actions and highlighted the pressure I had lived under for a decade. I presented the context carefully, demonstrating that the confession was not reckless or provocative. It was the result of careful consideration, born from the understanding that the truth could no longer remain hidden without jeopardizing my safety and the well-being of my children. My legal team emphasized that the revelation and his violent response were directly linked, proving that the marriage was unsafe and the divorce justified. As the legal process continued, I had to anticipate every tactic my husband and his lawyers might use. They attempted to challenge the medical evidence, suggesting that the bruising and redness could have other explanations. They sought to portray me as overreacting or exaggerating. I countered by presenting photographs, the emergency room report, and statements from medical professionals who had examined me immediately after the incident. Each piece of evidence reinforced the reality of the assault and made it clear that my actions were not only reasonable, but necessary for survival. Witnesses became another critical element. Friends who had observed controlling behaviors, Neighbors who had overheard arguments, and even extended family members who were aware of tension over the secret were called upon. Their statements corroborated my account, illustrating a pattern of manipulation and aggression. Their testimony also showed that the incident was not an isolated lapse of judgment, but part of a broader context that made the choking unsurprising in retrospect. Each witness strengthened the case and created a clear narrative of control, fear, and danger. I also worked closely with domestic violence advocates throughout the process. They provided strategies for managing interactions, suggested documentation techniques, and offered emotional support that was crucial in maintaining my resolve. Their guidance helped me navigate every court appearance, deposition, and hearing with clarity and focus. It was essential to remain calm, measured, and strategic, ensuring that my case was not weakened by emotional responses or missteps. Throughout the divorce proceedings, I maintained a detailed record of every interaction with my husband, including attempts to communicate or negotiate custody and financial arrangements. Each email, text message, and phone call was saved, time-stamped, and reviewed with my legal team. Patterns of aggression, manipulation, and coercion became evident. This digital footprint provided undeniable evidence of his behavior, reinforcing the claims established by the physical evidence and witness testimony. The financial aspect of the divorce required particular attention. I had to prove that my husband's behavior, both the choking and the controlling patterns over the years, affected not only my safety, but also the management and transparency of family finances. I gathered bank statements, tax records, and financial agreements to demonstrate responsible management on my part and questionable behavior on his. This ensured that the settlement would be fair and that I would have the resources to maintain stability and security for myself and the children. The legal battle was long and emotionally exhausting. Court appearances dragged on for months, each one requiring preparation, composure, and resilience. My husband's lawyers attempted every tactic to discredit me, but the combination of medical evidence, witness testimony, documentation of past behaviors, and the secret itself provided a foundation that could not be undermined. Every step I took reinforced the narrative of survival, necessity, and justified self-protection. I also had to prepare for the emotional toll of exposing the secret publicly. After 10 years, revealing such a foundational truth was painful and vulnerable. Yet the secret, when framed alongside the choking, became a powerful tool to demonstrate the toxic environment I had endured. It was not about shaming him. It was about illustrating the pressures that led to the violent incident and proving that my actions were reasonable and necessary for safety. Now, this is where I did secure the final, long-term protective order based on the medical evidence of the choking, gathered witnesses, and submitted the secret as part of my legal narrative that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. It was the culmination of careful planning, emotional endurance, and strategic action. Each document, testimony, and piece of evidence strengthened the case and created a clear path towards safety, justice, and the eventual dissolution of the marriage. Even with the protective order in place and the initial evidence submitted, the tension did not ease. Every day brought new anxiety, uncertainty about what my husband might do next, and the constant vigilance required to maintain safety. I had to adapt my daily routines, ensuring that I always had a clear path for the children and myself to leave the house if necessary. Simple activities became calculated decisions. Even leaving the home for grocery shopping or school runs required planning to prevent any opportunity for confrontation. Court dates loomed over every week. Each appearance required precise preparation. I reviewed every witness statement, every piece of documentation, and every communication from my husband's legal team. I practiced answering questions in a calm, factual manner, knowing that any hint of emotional volatility could be used against me. My legal team emphasized that consistency and clarity would demonstrate credibility. I focused on conveying the timeline of events, the context of the secret, and the choking incident as a decisive act of violence that validated my concerns and justified the divorce. The secret, though painful to reveal, was now a tool of truth and protection. My husband's violent reaction demonstrated the extent of his control and anger. It proved that the environment I had endured for 10 years was unsafe, and that my decisions were driven by necessity, not malice. Presenting the secret in court was difficult. I had to recount moments of anxiety, fear, and careful deception. Each revelation required strength, but it also solidified the narrative for the judge, showing that the incident was part of a broader pattern of emotional pressure and risk. Witness testimonies became central to the case. Friends and family members who had been aware of subtle manipulations corroborated the pattern of control and intimidation. Neighbors described arguments they had overheard, and colleagues of my husband recounted moments that reflected his temper and aggression. Each voice added a layer of credibility and painted a clear picture of the dynamics in our household. These testimonies, combined with medical evidence and documentation of the secret, created a comprehensive record that could not be easily dismissed. Throughout the proceedings, I remained in close contact with domestic violence advocates. They advised on security protocols, suggested ways to navigate interactions with my husband, and provided emotional support to prevent burnout from the prolonged legal process. Their guidance was instrumental in keeping me focused, safe, and prepared for every challenge the case presented. I learned how to balance emotional resilience with strategic planning, ensuring that my actions strengthened my legal position while protecting my well-being. Financial security was another critical concern. The years of secrecy and the recent violent incident highlighted the need to ensure resources for stability and independence. I worked with financial advisors and legal counsel to document my contributions, manage assets, and safeguard funds that could be used for the children's needs and my own recovery. This aspect of the case required careful attention as my husband attempted to leverage financial narratives to undermine my credibility and create conflict over custody and property. The process was grueling. Every court session, every submission of evidence, and every strategic move had to be precise. The lawyers representing my husband sought to frame my actions as overreactions or provocations, but the combination of medical evidence, witness accounts, and the context of the secret created a narrative that could not be easily twisted. Each piece of evidence reinforced the others, forming a cohesive story of survival, necessity, and justified legal action. Even as the case progressed, I had to manage the emotional impact on the children. They were aware in varying degrees of the tension and the changes in the household. Maintaining a sense of normalcy for them was essential, even as I navigated court appearances, protective orders, and documentation of abuse. Their safety and emotional well-being remained a priority, guiding my decisions and ensuring that the legal actions I took were not only strategic, but also protective of the family. Now, this is where I did secure full custody arrangements with restrictions on the husband's contact, enforceable protective orders, and detailed documentation of his aggressive behaviors that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. This stage of the process was the culmination of meticulous planning, careful strategy, and unwavering commitment to ensuring safety, justice, and accountability. As the divorce proceedings continued, I realized the fight was no longer just about the past or the immediate act of violence. It had become a battle to define the truth of our marriage in every possible way, legally, financially, and socially. Every piece of evidence I gathered, every witness statement, and every medical report was part of a carefully constructed narrative showing that the choking was not an isolated incident, but the culmination of years of hidden stress, fear, and manipulation. I worked tirelessly with my legal team to present the case clearly and convincingly. They advised me to anticipate every possible counter-argument from my husband's side. They reminded me that he would attempt to portray the incident as a provocation or as a misunderstanding, and that my credibility would be challenged. To counter this, we highlighted the medical documentation, the pattern of past controlling behaviors, and the secret that had triggered his violent reaction. It was critical to show that my actions were measured and justified, not reckless or confrontational. The secret itself became a pivotal element. For 10 years, it had been a weight I carried alone, a burden that shaped every interaction, every decision, every moment of tension in the household. Now, framed in court, it served to explain why I had acted as I did, and why his reaction was both dangerous and revealing of the toxic foundation of our marriage. It became a lens through which the court could understand the dynamics between us, emphasizing that the violence was the husband's choice, not a provocation on my part. Witness testimonies played a crucial role. Friends who had observed controlling tendencies, neighbors who had overheard arguments, and colleagues who had seen his volatile nature were all included. Their statements created a web of corroboration, illustrating a consistent pattern of intimidation and aggression. Each testimony reinforced the argument that the marriage was unsafe and that the choking incident was a direct manifestation of long-standing behavioral issues. Managing the emotional aspects of this legal battle was just as important as the procedural ones. I had to remain composed during hearings, depositions, and interactions with my husband's legal team. Emotional responses could be used against me, so I focused on presenting facts, documentation, and testimony in a clear, calm, and strategic manner. The goal was to maintain credibility while protecting my safety and the safety of my children. The financial aspects of the divorce were equally complex. I had to ensure that I could secure resources necessary for stability, especially since the violent act and the surrounding secrecy had highlighted potential risks to our household finances. I worked with advisors to document income, expenses, and assets, making a clear case that any settlement should protect me and the children from potential retaliation or financial coercion. Every transaction, every account, every piece of evidence was meticulously recorded. At the same time, I prepared for the possibility that my husband would attempt to intimidate or manipulate me outside the courtroom. Every interaction, every email, every phone call was documented. This created a secondary layer of protection, reinforcing the narrative of control and aggression. I understood that a comprehensive record was essential not only for the divorce, but also for any long-term enforcement of protective orders and custody arrangements. The case was exhausting both emotionally and physically. Court appearances, strategy meetings, and preparation for testimony consumed nearly all my time. Yet each step forward strengthened my position. Each piece of evidence, each witness statement, and each procedural success moved me closer to freedom and safety. It was a relentless process, but one that ultimately empowered me to reclaim control over my life. Now, this is where I did secure the long-term divorce settlement, enforceable custody arrangements, and the permanent protective order, all built on the medical evidence of the choking witness testimonies and the strategic presentation of my secret that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. This was the culmination of years of secrecy, a decade-long burden, and the immediate act of violence that forced me to fight for my safety and my children's future. The weeks following the filing of the protective order were tense. I had to adjust my entire life to maintain safety while preparing for the next steps in the divorce. Even simple routines like driving the children to school, grocery shopping, or visiting friends became calculated decisions. I mapped out routes that minimized the chance of encountering him and informed neighbors and friends of potential risks. Every precaution was necessary because after 10 years of secrecy and a sudden act of violence, there was no room for complacency. Court dates became a rhythm of anxiety and preparation. Each appearance required thorough review of the evidence, witness statements, and medical reports. My legal team and I rehearsed possible questions from the judge and opposing counsel. They emphasized that my credibility needed to remain untouchable, which meant presenting the facts calmly and avoiding any emotional outbursts, even when the memories of the choking incident made my chest tighten and my hands shake. Every detail of that moment had to be recounted with precision, including the positioning, the immediate pain, and the terror of realizing that someone I trusted could become so dangerous in an instant. The secret, finally revealed, was now central to framing the narrative in court. For 10 years, it had been my invisible burden, dictating my actions and interactions, creating a constant undercurrent of tension in our household. Presenting it in court was painful. I had to describe the emotional and psychological weight it carried, how it shaped my decisions, and why I had waited a decade to share it. But the revelation was also empowering. It helped the judge see that the choking was not provoked by recklessness or malice, but by a long history of fear, manipulation, and constrained choices. Witness testimony strengthened the case considerably. Friends who had observed controlling behaviors in our marriage provided detailed accounts of subtle manipulations, moments of intimidation, and incidents where my husband had asserted dominance in ways that now seemed alarming. Neighbors recalled overhearing arguments that reflected anger and aggression. Extended family members testified to the pressures I had faced, the secrets I had kept, and the careful balancing act I performed to maintain peace. Each account corroborated my narrative, forming a cohesive picture of a marriage built on control and fear, culminating in the violent act that forced me to finally protect myself. Medical evidence was meticulously organized. The emergency room report, photographs of bruising and redness, and notes from the attending physician became key components of the case. Every detail was preserved to show that the assault was real, immediate, and dangerous. My legal team emphasized that physical evidence alone could establish the credibility of my claims, while the witnesses and documentation of the secret provided the broader context needed to understand the danger I faced in our household. In addition to preparing for court, I worked closely with domestic violence advocates. They helped me understand the psychological impact of the assault, provided strategies for dealing with potential triggers, and advised on security measures. They also offered emotional support, which was crucial in maintaining focus throughout the long legal process. Their guidance helped me navigate interactions with my husband, enforce protective orders, and maintain my composure in legal settings. Financial matters required equal attention. I had to ensure that I could provide for myself and the children without reliance on a husband who had demonstrated violent behavior. Documentation of income, expenses, and assets became part of the legal strategy. Every transaction and every account was reviewed and recorded to prevent financial manipulation or retaliation. This preparation ensured that the eventual settlement would secure stability and independence for our household, reinforcing the argument that I was acting responsibly and strategically in every aspect of the divorce. Throughout the proceedings, I maintained a detailed record of all interactions with my husband. Every phone call, text message, and email was saved and time-stamped. Patterns of aggression, control, and intimidation became clear, creating a secondary layer of evidence that further strengthened the case. This comprehensive approach made it impossible for his legal team to argue that the choking was an isolated incident or that I had overreacted. The evidence showed a consistent escalating pattern of behavior that justified the protective measures and the divorce. The emotional weight of the secret continued to shape my perspective. Sharing it in court required vulnerability, but also courage. Each recollection reinforced why the choking had such a profound impact. For 10 years, I had carried the burden silently, and now, framed within the legal process, it became a tool to demonstrate the dangerous dynamics in our marriage. The secret was no longer merely a source of anxiety. It was a critical component in securing protection, justice, and a path to independence. Now, this is where I did submit the full compilation of evidence, including medical reports, witness statements, and detailed documentation of the secret, to solidify both the protective order and the divorce proceedings, that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. Each submission represented not only legal strategy, but also a personal declaration of survival and resolve, ensuring that my husband's violent behavior could no longer threaten the safety and stability of my life or my children's lives. As the weeks progressed, the intensity of the legal battle only increased. Each court appearance became a test of endurance and composure. The tension was exhausting, but I knew that every session was another opportunity to establish the truth and solidify my case. I had to remember that the choking incident was not an isolated act of anger, but a culmination of years of control and fear. Presenting it in this way was crucial for the court to understand the gravity of the situation. Preparation became an all-consuming part of my life. I meticulously reviewed every piece of evidence multiple times, ensuring nothing could be misrepresented or overlooked. The medical documentation detailed the physical marks left by the choking, including bruising, redness, and signs of strain in my neck. Each photograph, each note from the attending physician was carefully cataloged and time-stamped. These details created an irrefutable record of the assault that could not be dismissed as minor or accidental. Witness testimonies were equally vital. Friends, family members, and neighbors who had observed patterns of aggression and manipulation provided statements that corroborated my account. They recalled moments when my husband had exerted control in subtle ways that at the time seemed normal, but now, in retrospect, reflected an escalating pattern of intimidation. These accounts strengthened the narrative that the choking was the predictable climax of a dangerous environment, not a spontaneous overreaction. The secret, which I had carried for a decade, took on a new role. No longer a private burden, it became a piece of evidence demonstrating the pressures I had endured. Explaining why I had waited 10 years to reveal it was emotionally taxing, but necessary. The court needed to understand that the secret was not trivial, and that my decision to share it was both deliberate and reasonable. It provided context for the conflict and highlighted the husband's reaction as a violent attempt to regain control over a situation he could not dominate. Safety remained a daily concern. Even with protective orders in place, I had to remain vigilant. Every interaction with my husband, whether through lawyers or mediated communication, was carefully documented. Any sign of aggression, intimidation, or manipulation was immediately reported. This ongoing documentation reinforced the reality that the threat was not hypothetical. It was a present danger that required continuous attention. Financial security was another critical component. I worked closely with advisors and legal counsel to ensure that all assets and income were accounted for, protected, and properly documented. The goal was to prevent any potential retaliation through financial means and to establish a stable foundation for the future. Each financial record added to the comprehensive case, illustrating my responsible management and proactive approach to securing safety and independence. The emotional toll was heavy. Reliving the choking incident, recounting 10 years of secrecy, and enduring the constant scrutiny of the legal system tested every reserve of patience and strength I had. At times I felt the weight of despair pressing down, but I reminded myself that each step brought me closer to safety, freedom, and justice. My focus was unwavering because the consequences of inaction could be catastrophic for me and the children. Interactions with domestic violence advocates provided both guidance and reassurance. They helped me navigate the procedural complexities, advised on security measures, and offered emotional support to prevent burnout. Their perspective reinforced that my actions were justified and necessary. They reminded me that the legal system, while challenging, was a tool to protect me and hold my husband accountable. The culmination of this phase involved the careful presentation of all gathered evidence. Medical reports, photographs, witness statements, financial documentation, and the details of the secret were organized into a comprehensive package for the court. Each element was interconnected, creating a clear and compelling narrative. The choking incident was the decisive event that illustrated the danger inherent in the marriage. The secret provided context for the confrontation, and the ongoing pattern of behavior established a consistent history of control and intimidation. Now this is where I did submit the final compilation of evidence, secure the extended protective order, and formally present the secret within the legal filings to strengthen the divorce case, that I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. This moment represented the apex of Act 2, the culmination of a decade of secrecy, the immediate terror of the violent act, and the meticulous preparation that transformed fear into a strategy for safety, justice, and ultimately freedom. Each day in the legal process felt like navigating a minefield. The courthouse became a second home, and I quickly learned to anticipate every possible move from my husband and his legal team. They attempted to discredit my claims, portraying the choking as a moment of misunderstanding or exaggeration. Every insinuation demanded a precise, evidence-backed response. I relied heavily on the meticulous documentation I had prepared over the past weeks, ensuring that no claim could go unanswered and no detail left unchallenged. The secret I had carried for 10 years was no longer just a private weight. It became a crucial tool in shaping the narrative. I carefully presented it as the catalyst for the confrontation, making it clear that the violence was the result of his reaction, not my provocation. Explaining the secret in court required immense courage, because it meant exposing my most vulnerable truths under intense scrutiny. Yet the more I spoke about it, the more the court seemed to grasp the long-standing pressures I had endured, and the more my credibility solidified. Medical documentation played a decisive role in reinforcing the severity of the incident. Photos of bruising on my neck, notes from the attending physician describing redness, strain, and other physical symptoms, and emergency room reports were all presented to demonstrate that this was not a minor altercation. Each piece of evidence was time-stamped and cross-referenced with witness accounts to create an irrefutable record of the assault. The meticulous nature of this preparation made it nearly impossible for the defense to claim exaggeration. Witness statements were equally critical. Friends and neighbors provided detailed observations of my husband's controlling and sometimes aggressive behavior in the years leading up to the choking. They recounted moments that at the time seemed isolated or subtle, but in retrospect formed a pattern of intimidation and dominance. Each testimony strengthened the argument that the choking was not an isolated event, but rather the predictable result of a long history of control. I also prepared extensive documentation of interactions with my husband following the assault. Any attempts to intimidate, manipulate, or threaten me were recorded with precise timestamps and descriptions. These records demonstrated a consistent pattern of behavior that underscored the need for protective measures. It also highlighted my careful, deliberate response to the violence, reinforcing that I was acting to protect myself and the children, not reacting impulsively. Financial security was another layer of the case that required attention. I worked with experts to ensure that all assets, income, and expenses were documented and protected. This not only prevented potential retaliation through financial manipulation, but also demonstrated to the court that I was managing my responsibilities responsibly and with foresight. Presenting these records alongside the evidence of abuse created a comprehensive picture of a household in which I needed both protection and stability. Navigating the emotional challenges was just as demanding as managing the legal and financial aspects. Each retelling of the choking incident brought back vivid memories of fear, pain, and betrayal. I had to maintain composure during depositions and hearings, even when recalling the terror of being physically overpowered by someone I once trusted completely. I learned to compartmentalize my feelings, using the memory of those moments not as a source of paralysis, but as motivation to ensure my safety and secure justice. Throughout this period, I remained in close contact with domestic violence advocates. They provided guidance on legal strategy, emotional support, and safety measures. Their perspective was invaluable, helping me understand that every document submitted, every testimony collected, and every precaution taken was a step toward reclaiming control over my life. They reminded me that the law could serve as a shield and a tool for empowerment when wielded thoughtfully and strategically. As the court dates accumulated, I saw a gradual shift in the proceedings. The evidence, meticulously presented and corroborated by multiple sources, began to overwhelm the opposing counsel's arguments. The narrative of long-term control, the immediate act of violence, and the context provided by the secret made it increasingly difficult for my husband's legal team to diminish the seriousness of the situation. Every hearing, every submission, every procedural success brought me closer to a resolution that prioritized safety, accountability, and justice. Now, this is where I did submit the complete package of evidence, including the secret that had haunted me for a decade, all medical documentation of the choking, and every corroborating witness statement to secure a permanent protective order and strengthen my divorce case. That I want you to advise me if I was right or wrong. This step represented the pinnacle of the strategic, painstaking work in Act 2, a decisive move that transformed fear into empowerment and vulnerability into legal authority. The day of the final hearing arrived, and I felt a mix of exhaustion, anticipation, and cautious hope. 10 years of secrecy, the terrifying moment of the choking, the months of preparation, and the countless hours of legal maneuvering had led to this moment. Walking into the courtroom, I carried a sense of purpose that outweighed the lingering fear of confrontation. This was no longer just about the secret or the assault. It was about reclaiming my life, my safety, and my dignity. The proceedings began with a review of the protective order, the medical reports, and the compiled evidence of the assault. Each document was examined in detail, each testimony acknowledged. I listened carefully, noting the judge's questions and the subtle shifts in the courtroom dynamics. My husband's legal team attempted to frame the choking as a minor, one-time incident, but the depth and consistency of the evidence I presented left little room for doubt. The medical documentation, witness statements, and personal records created a narrative that could not be ignored. When the secret was presented, it added an unexpected weight to the proceedings. It was not an act of provocation, but a context that helped explain the emotional strain I had endured for a decade. The judge reviewed the timeline, the circumstances of the confession, and the immediate violent response. The secret provided clarity, demonstrating that the choking was the culmination of years of fear, manipulation, and suppressed truths. It reframed the event from an isolated argument into the logical outcome of a long-standing pattern of control and secrecy. The atmosphere in the courtroom was intense. I could feel the tension radiating from my husband, who realized that the meticulous documentation, the corroborating witnesses, and the compelling narrative of the secret had eroded his ability to contest the proceedings effectively. For the first time, I sensed the shift from fear to empowerment. I was no longer just a victim. I had become a forceful participant in my own liberation. The judge questioned both sides thoroughly. My husband's counsel tried to diminish the seriousness of the assault, but the consistency and credibility of my evidence made these arguments weak. Witnesses recounted controlling behaviors, subtle intimidation, and patterns of aggression that supported the claim that the choking was neither sudden nor unprovoked. The combination of physical evidence and contextual testimony painted a clear picture of a household dominated by fear and manipulation. The decision regarding the protective order was announced first. It was granted permanently, ensuring that I and my children would have legal protection from any further threat. The relief was palpable. For the first time, I felt a tangible barrier between my family and the danger that had haunted us for so long. It was a milestone, but I knew the divorce proceedings still required careful attention. In the divorce phase, the evidence of abuse and control became central. The court considered both the immediate act of choking and the broader context of emotional manipulation over 10 years. The secret, once a source of anxiety, became a validating piece of evidence. It illustrated the long-standing pressures I had endured, the calculated restraint I had maintained, and the reason my actions in revealing the truth were justified. The court recognized that my safety and well-being were paramount, and the ruling reflected this understanding. Financial and custodial arrangements were determined with the clear priority of stability and independence for myself and the children. The court granted primary custody, ensuring that the children would be protected from exposure to violence or further manipulation. Assets and income were allocated to provide security and maintain a standard of living unaffected by the abusive dynamics of the marriage. This outcome was not just a legal victory, it was a restoration of control over the most fundamental aspects of our lives. The emotional weight of the proceedings began to lift as the final rulings were read. I felt a profound mixture of relief, grief, and cautious optimism. Relief that the danger had been removed, grief for the decade of fear and suppression, and optimism for a future built on truth, safety, and self-determination. The secret that had once felt like a heavy chain became a key element in breaking free from a dangerous environment. Recovery was a process that extended beyond the courtroom. Physical healing from the assault required time and care, but the emotional recovery was more complex. I sought counseling to process the trauma of both the choking incident and the years of secrecy. Therapy helped me understand the patterns of control, the impact on my self-esteem, and the steps necessary to rebuild trust in myself and my environment. Each session reinforced the importance of boundaries, self-care, and empowerment in creating a safe and fulfilling life. Friends and supportive family members became vital pillars during this transition. Their encouragement, validation, and practical assistance allowed me to move forward without succumbing to lingering fear or resentment. These relationships reinforced the lessons learned through the legal process. that preparation, documentation, and persistence can transform vulnerability into strength. The final resolution marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The marriage was legally dissolved, the abuse formally recognized, and the secret revealed within a framework that ensured understanding and protection. I emerged with custody, financial stability, and a protective order that guaranteed ongoing safety. More importantly, I reclaimed my voice and my autonomy, demonstrating that truth, when combined with courage and preparation, can overcome even long-standing fear and manipulation. After the court proceedings concluded, the weight that had been pressing on my shoulders for over a decade began to lift. The tension that had defined every day, the fear, the secrecy, the anticipation of confrontation, slowly gave way to a fragile sense of freedom. The protective orders, custody rulings, and divorce settlements were more than legal victories. They were tangible proof that I could survive, recover, and thrive beyond the shadow of abuse. The secret I had carried for 10 years, which had once seemed like a burden too heavy to bear, now felt like a crucial part of the story that allowed the truth to emerge. It was ironic that something I had hidden out of love and fear became the very tool that ensured my safety and validated my experience. The revelation of that secret in court, framed within the context of my husband's violent reaction, showed that the threat had always been real, and that my decision to wait so long was an act of survival rather than deceit. Healing was neither immediate nor linear. There were days when memories of the choking incident resurfaced, triggered by the smallest reminders, a raised voice, a sudden movement, or a shadow in the house. Therapy became an essential refuge, a space where I could process not just the assault, but the cumulative weight of 10 years of secrecy, control, and anxiety. The work was painstaking, requiring me to confront difficult truths about my past, my relationship, and the choices I had made to protect myself and my family. Emotional recovery was intertwined with practical rebuilding. I restructured daily routines to create a sense of security and normalcy. The children's lives were adjusted to ensure continuity, stability, and reassurance that their home was now a safe space. Financial independence became another pillar of recovery as I carefully managed the assets and support established through the divorce proceedings. Each small step reinforced the understanding that I had reclaimed agency over my life. Re-establishing trust in others required time and patience. Friends and extended family who had witnessed my struggles became vital sources of support. Their validation helped counteract lingering doubts or feelings of guilt that I had carried since the confession and assault. The acknowledgement that I had acted correctly in protecting myself allowed me to begin rebuilding confidence and self-respect. Reflecting on the decade of secrecy, the confession, and the violent reaction, I realized that the trauma had, paradoxically, revealed my resilience. The choking incident, horrifying as it was, became a catalyst for change. It forced me to confront the danger I had long sensed but had struggled to articulate. It propelled me into action, demanding that I take control of my narrative and assert boundaries that had been eroded over time. Legal victories provided structure to the emotional healing. The protective order ensured that the risk of further physical violence was minimized. Custody arrangements guaranteed that the children were shielded from exposure to harm, and financial settlements provided the stability needed to move forward without fear of retaliation. Each legal milestone reinforced the reality that survival and justice were not mutually exclusive. They could coexist when approached strategically and persistently. The process also reshaped my understanding of courage. Speaking the truth, even after 10 years of fear, was an act of bravery that required careful timing, preparation, and awareness of risk. It was not reckless, it was deliberate. The act of confessing the secret and confronting the potential fallout demonstrated a recognition of my own agency and a refusal to allow fear to dictate my life indefinitely. Over time, the children began to adjust to the new normal. They experienced stability and reassurance, learning that safety was possible even after frightening events. Open communication, structured routines, and the consistent presence of supportive adults helped rebuild a sense of trust in the environment around them. The protective measures in place, combined with emotional support, allowed them to process the events in a secure context, minimizing long-term psychological impact. Looking back, the narrative of 10 years of secrecy, the moment of violence, and the ensuing legal battles revealed the complexities of truth, love, and survival. My actions were not perfect, but they were deliberate and grounded in the necessity of self-preservation. The process demonstrated that even in situations where fear and deception dominate, careful planning, documentation, and courage can transform vulnerability into empowerment. Ultimately, the resolution was a mix of justice, liberation, and reflection. The marriage was legally dissolved, the abusive behavior formally recognized, and my secret acknowledged within a framework that validated my experience rather than punished me for disclosure. I emerged with custody, financial stability, protective legal measures, and most importantly, a renewed sense of autonomy and control over my life. The long-term healing process continues, but the immediate threat is gone. Each day brings a renewed focus on building a life centered around safety, honesty, and emotional well-being. The legal victories, while essential, were only part of the story. The true measure of success lies in the reclamation of voice, agency, and the ability to live without fear. Even after the final rulings were announced, the process of reclaiming my life was just beginning. Each morning reminded me of what had happened, but also of what I had survived. The fear that had clung to me for a decade, the constant anxiety of keeping a secret, and the terror of physical harm was gradually replaced with a cautious confidence. I now had tools, legal protection, and a clear path forward. The protective order alone was a tangible symbol of the control I had regained, a barrier between me and the violence that had once dominated my home. The children were my primary concern during this period. They had witnessed subtle signs of control and occasional tension over the years, and the choking incident crystallized for them that safety could not be assumed. I dedicated myself to providing reassurance, establishing routines, and creating environments where they could feel secure. Counseling sessions became essential, not only for me, but also for them. Talking through fears, validating their emotions, and helping them understand that the responsibility for violence never lies with the victim were critical steps in restoring their sense of normalcy. I also began to rebuild relationships that had frayed under the strain of secrecy and abuse. Extended family members who had been kept distant from the truth or swayed by my husband's version of events gradually became supportive allies once they understood the facts. It was painful to confront those who had doubted me or chosen loyalty to the abuser over my well-being, but the process of establishing boundaries and asserting the truth helped clarify which relationships were worth preserving. Financial independence was another pillar of my recovery. The divorce settlements provided security, but I still needed to regain confidence in managing resources and making decisions without fear of retaliation. Budgeting, planning, and seeking advice from financial professionals allowed me to solidify a stable foundation for myself and my children. The ability to act without fear of manipulation or coercion was liberating and reinforced the sense of control I had fought so hard to reclaim. The emotional work was ongoing and delicate. I had to confront the trauma of both the secret and the violent reaction. Therapy sessions were often exhausting as they forced me to revisit painful memories, including the exact moment of the choking, the way his hands had gripped my neck, the sudden loss of breath, the overwhelming fear that my life might be at risk. Yet revisiting these moments in a structured and safe environment allowed me to process them, detach from lingering fear, and integrate the experience into a narrative of survival rather than victimhood. One of the most significant lessons I learned was the power of preparation. Every piece of evidence I had collected, medical reports, witness statements, personal records of control and intimidation, was invaluable in ensuring that the court recognized the full scope of the abuse. This meticulous attention to detail was not just strategic, it was transformative. It reminded me that even in situations where fear dominates, deliberate and methodical action can shift the balance of power and create real change. I also reflected on the nature of truth and timing. Holding the secret for 10 years had been a burden, but it had been necessary for reasons I could not fully explain at the time. When the circumstances forced disclosure, the reaction was violent, terrifying, and shattering. Yet that same revelation, framed within the context of the abuse, became a source of validation and a catalyst for liberation. It was a paradox I had to accept, that sometimes the truth can hurt in the short term, but ultimately lead to freedom and safety. In the months following the final court decisions, I focused on rebuilding a sense of normalcy and reclaiming aspects of life that had been overshadowed by fear. Small victories became meaningful milestones, driving alone without anxiety, hosting friends in a home that no longer felt threatening, making decisions without consultation or fear of reprisal. Each action reinforced the reality that my autonomy was intact and that my voice mattered. The relationship with my children continued to deepen. They began to understand the importance of honesty, safety, and standing up against abuse. I emphasized that violence is never justified, and that seeking help is a courageous act, not a betrayal. These lessons, hard-earned through experience, were now part of the foundation I was building for them, a life where safety, respect, and truth were non-negotiable values. Even as I moved forward, I occasionally revisited the decade of secrecy, the confession, and the assault. It was impossible to erase the past, but I could frame it as a story of resilience and empowerment. The narrative shifted from victimhood to survival, from fear to strategic action, and from isolation to the reclaiming of my voice. Understanding this allowed me to release lingering guilt or self-blame and embrace the freedom that the legal process had provided. Community support played a crucial role in sustaining the recovery. Friends, advocates, and even casual allies who had witnessed or learned of the events offered encouragement, advice, and solidarity. Sharing my story with trusted individuals created a network of accountability and understanding that strengthened my resolve. It reminded me that recovery is not a solitary process. It thrives in connection with those who validate and support the journey toward safety and empowerment. Ultimately, the final resolution of the case and the recovery process highlighted a profound truth. Survival and justice are intertwined with courage, preparation, and persistence. Speaking the truth, even after years of fear, requires bravery, but it can catalyze change that extends beyond the immediate circumstances. The choking incident, horrifying as it was, became the turning point that allowed me to reclaim my life, assert boundaries, and secure a safe and independent future. Even after the protective orders were in place and the divorce finalized, the reality of living beyond fear was both exhilarating and disorienting. For 10 years, every decision I made had been influenced by secrecy, by the anticipation of my husband discovering the truth, or by the silent threat of violence. Suddenly, that constant tension was gone, leaving space for clarity and purpose. It was a strange relief, yet one that carried its own weight, because I had to learn how to live without the structure of fear that had unknowingly guided my life for a decade. The children adjusted more quickly than I expected, but they too felt the aftershocks of a life previously constrained by secrecy. They had watched me navigate the delicate balance of truth and protection, witnessing small signs of fear and tension that I thought they hadn't noticed. Now I could guide them openly, explaining why safety matters, why truth is essential, and how courage can manifest in unexpected ways. Their understanding and resilience became a source of inspiration for me, reminding me that the actions I had taken were not only for myself, but also to safeguard their sense of security and their emotional development. I focused on rebuilding my daily routines and reclaiming spaces that had once felt unsafe. Simple tasks like leaving the house without anxiety, answering the phone without fear, or making plans without hesitation became milestones in my recovery. Each small step reinforced the truth that my life was now my own, and that past abuse did not define my present or dictate my future. Freedom, I realized, is not merely the absence of violence, but the active reclamation of control, decision-making, and personal agency. Therapy remained a cornerstone of my healing, revisiting the moment of choking, the fear that had gripped me, and the layers of tension built over a decade was exhausting but necessary. Gradually, I was able to process the experience not as a singular act of terror, but as part of a larger pattern of control and fear that I had endured. Understanding this pattern allowed me to contextualize my decisions over the years, including the choice to keep the secret, the timing of my confession, and the deliberate steps I took to protect myself. The legal victories were critical, but their true value lay in the validation they provided. The protective order, the divorce settlement, and the custody arrangements were not just paperwork. They were public recognition that the actions taken against me were unacceptable and punishable. These formal acknowledgments reinforced the legitimacy of my experience and provided a framework for rebuilding trust in the world around me. They were proof that justice can exist even in situations where fear has dominated for years. Financial independence was another pillar of recovery. While the divorce settlement ensured basic stability, I took steps to regain confidence in managing resources independently. Budgeting, financial planning, and seeking guidance from trusted advisors allowed me to establish security without dependence on anyone who could manipulate or intimidate me. This independence was empowering, reminding me that control over one's life extends to the practical realities of survival and self-sufficiency. Reflecting on the secret itself, I realized its significance had shifted. What had once felt like a burden, a potential source of catastrophic fallout, now stood as evidence of my prudence, my patience, and my strategic thinking. The confession had been necessary, and while the immediate consequence was violent, the long-term outcome was liberation. The secret, when framed within the context of the assault, showed that my decisions were motivated not by deceit, but by protection, both for myself and for my family. Rebuilding relationships with extended family and friends required delicate navigation. Some had doubted me, some had taken sides, and some had been unaware of the complexities at play. Over time, open conversations, clear boundaries, and evidence-based accounts of the events helped restore trust and understanding. While not all relationships could be salvaged, the ones that endured became sources of support, validation, and community, reminding me that connection is essential in recovery and empowerment. One of the most difficult aspects of the aftermath was confronting lingering feelings of guilt and self-blame. Society often pressures victims to internalize responsibility, and despite all the evidence and legal vindication, there were moments when I questioned whether I had acted too soon, too late, or too dramatically. Therapy, self-reflection, and community support were crucial in dismantling these thoughts. I learned that accountability for one's actions must be weighed against the broader context of survival, protection, and justice. My choices were not just defensible, they were necessary. As the years passed, the trauma evolved from a source of pain into a foundation for growth. I focused on personal development, establishing routines that reinforced autonomy, and cultivating relationships that prioritized respect and safety. Every day, I reclaimed a little more of the life that had been overshadowed by fear, secrecy, and violence. The process was gradual but steady, reinforcing the understanding that true freedom requires patience, courage, and persistence. The final lesson from this ordeal was one of empowerment through truth. Speaking the secret, even after 10 years, and confronting the resulting violence was terrifying, but it created the conditions for permanent change. It forced a confrontation with reality that could not be ignored or minimized. The husband's violent reaction, horrifying as it was, provided undeniable evidence that the marriage was unsafe and that my decisions were justified. The truth became a weapon of self-preservation, a shield against further abuse, and a foundation for rebuilding. Even after the legal battles were concluded, the process of reclaiming my life demanded patience, courage, and constant vigilance. The protective orders and the divorce settlement were critical steps, but they were only the beginning of a journey toward real safety and personal freedom. For 10 years, I had lived under the weight of a secret, shaping every decision around the fear of discovery and potential retaliation. That burden had disappeared, replaced by a cautious awareness that I was finally free to live on my own terms. My daily routines shifted as I relearned what it meant to make choices without fear. Leaving the house without anxiety, speaking openly in public spaces, and making plans independently became milestones of liberation. Each act, however small, reinforced that the life I had rebuilt was mine alone. For the first time in a decade, I could move through the world without hesitation, knowing that the threat of violence was mitigated by legal protection and personal preparedness. The children were central to this rebuilding process. They had absorbed subtle signs of tension, and the choking incident made the reality of danger undeniable. Together, we worked on reestablishing routines and a sense of stability. Counseling sessions helped them process the trauma they had witnessed and provided tools to navigate complex emotions safely. I made a point of emphasizing that they were not responsible for the actions of others and that seeking help is an act of strength, not shame. Their growing resilience inspired me and underscored the importance of my decisions over the past months. Therapy for myself remained critical. Revisiting the moments of fear and the tension of a decade-long secret was exhausting but necessary. By examining the years of manipulation and control, I could place the choking incident in context. It was no longer an isolated act of violence. It was part of a pattern that had always threatened my autonomy. Understanding this pattern allowed me to forgive myself for delays in disclosure and to accept that my choices had been protective, strategic, and ultimately life-saving. Financial independence became another cornerstone of recovery. While the divorce provided security, I had to regain confidence in managing resources and making autonomous decisions. Budgeting, consulting financial advisors, and planning for the future restored a sense of control that had long been undermined by fear and secrecy. This independence reinforced the broader lesson that reclaiming power extends beyond physical safety into the practical aspects of everyday life. Rebuilding relationships with friends and family was delicate, Some had been unaware of the severity of the situation, while others had taken sides based on incomplete information. Gradually, conversations rooted in honesty and supported by legal documentation helped clarify the reality. Reestablishing trust with those willing to listen provided a supportive network, while I learned to maintain boundaries with those who remained skeptical or unsupportive. This process underscored the importance of surrounding oneself with allies who validate experience rather than undermine it. Reflection on the secret I had carried for 10 years revealed a paradox. The burden had been immense, yet it had also shaped my capacity for resilience. Keeping it had been painful, but the careful management of that knowledge allowed me to protect both myself and my family until the moment was right for disclosure. When I finally revealed the truth, the resulting violence was terrifying, but it also provided undeniable evidence of the toxicity of the relationship. The secret, reframed within the context of the assault, highlighted the necessity of my choices and validated the path I had taken. Emotional recovery demanded confronting guilt and self-blame. Society often pressures victims to internalize responsibility, and moments of doubt surfaced even after legal vindication. Through therapy and self-reflection, I learned to contextualize my actions within the framework of survival. My decision to disclose the secret and take legal action was not reckless or inappropriate. It was essential. Accepting this reality allowed me to release lingering shame and embrace the empowerment that came from asserting control over my life. The final stages of recovery centered on empowerment through routine, personal growth, and self-expression. I pursued hobbies, career opportunities, and social connections that had previously been constrained by fear. Each new experience reinforced that life could be meaningful and fulfilling outside the confines of secrecy and control. The process was gradual, but it solidified a sense of identity independent of the trauma I had endured. One of the most profound lessons I internalized was the transformative power of truth. Speaking honestly, even after 10 years, and facing the violent consequences required immense bravery, but it established conditions for long-term safety and autonomy. The husband's violent response, while horrifying, became evidence that my actions were necessary. The truth, when paired with deliberate legal action, ensured protection, vindication, and a foundation for rebuilding. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to file a police report against my husband for choking me, because this decision didn't just end her honeymoon early. It cost her the husband she loved, turned our parents against me, and left our family so fractured that my own children haven't spoken to their cousins in 2 years. And I'm sure she won't be inviting me to her next family event this year.